Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Hey, welcome back, everyone. Funerals, not usually an easy topic to talk about, but very important. It's part of life, and planning for your life and the end of your life or even a loved one's is super important. You can honor them the way they wanted to be honored. And we're going to talk about what's known as prearranging your funeral or somebody's funeral. And we're going to do that with the president and owner of Martin A. Gleason Funeral Home, LLC, located in the Queens, New York area. They have 3 locations. And John Golden from that wonderful, wonderful family business joins us. Hi, John. How you doing?
Good, Steve. And yourself?
Very well. Very well. We skimmed this topic a few podcasts back about prearranging. There's steps within, and this is new territory for many. So could we take a look at some of those steps that go into prearranging a funeral?
Sure. First of all, when you're ready, call the funeral home you prefer and make an appointment. Naturally, we suggest to call Gleason's Funeral Home, who have been in business for 111 years. We are open 7 days a week to make pre-arrangements, including weekends. You can arrange your funeral at the funeral home, at the house, or apartment if you prefer. We do make house calls. If you want just to put your wishes on file at the funeral home, you can. Or you may start off with an initial payment of $500 and add to it whenever you wish. The money is placed in an FDIC insured account. We use the pre-planned funeral trust as the funeral trust administrator. With pre-planned, families' pre-need funds are 100% government-backed and audited quarterly to ensure compliance. They are the gold standard. Their Better Business rating is A+. Your money's FDIC insured, and the funeral home can't touch the money until the death occurs. This is New York state law, and it is the best protection for the consumer in the country. Also, you're allowed to transfer your pre-plan from one funeral home to another. The pre-plan account collects interest. The net consumer yield for last month, July 2024, was 2.12%. If you are not receiving Medicaid, you can get your money back and the interest at any time. The money is placed in a revocable account if you're not receiving Medicaid benefits. If you are receiving Medicaid benefits, the money has to be placed in an irrevocable account, which means whatever money that is put in the account has to be spent on your funeral. If any money is left over in this account, it'll be returned to the social service department of the county that you live in. There is no limit to how much money can be paid for a funeral if you're receiving Medicaid benefits. It is perfectly legal, exempt from the nursing home and the government. All citizens, regardless of income, are entitled to and deserving of both a proper funeral service and burial and cremation with dignity and respect. In fact, federal and state laws support this guiding principle in a number of ways. A question we've been asked sometimes is, what happens if Gleason's goes out of business? This question brings to mind a woman named May. I had just received my funeral director's license in 1979 when a friend of my family came up to me after church services and said she wanted to make pre-arrangements, which she did and paid for everything. She was 75 years old. Every year she would call me to update her file. One year she would add a hymn, another year a different clergy person. In 2005, 26 years later, at the age of 101, she called me to ask what happens if something happens to me, John Golden. I started to laugh when saying at the rate you're going, that's a possibility. But don't worry, your funeral was FDIC insured and transferable to any New York State funeral home. 5 years later, at the age of 106, which she had no relatives at that age, She passed away, and we took care of her funeral arrangements and honored all her requests. We take care of cremations, burials, and entombments. If you decide on cremation, the Catholic Church now allows it. You can have a wake, a mass, and then cremate. Cremains are a perpetual responsibility and should eventually be buried or placed in a niche. We recommend if you make your funeral arrangements in advance, there's a new agent form you should fill out to ensure your wishes will be followed. This form is just for your funeral arrangements only. The person you name as your agent is in charge of your funeral arrangements only. You should print on the agent form if you want a mass, or especially if you want to be cremated. If you don't have surviving relatives, a friend, neighbor, rabbi, or pastor can be agent to make your funeral arrangements. This is especially important now that New York State is a majority rule state, which means a majority of your children, if they are your next of kin, must agree to your cremation or funeral arrangements. The designation of an agent eliminates this problem because the agent you choose makes all the decisions when the time occurs. All our funeral directors at Gleason Funeral Home have years of experience at training and are available 7 days a week. Also, there's no charge to make pre-arrangements. Honorably discharged veterans are entitled to a grave for themselves and spouse at a national veterans cemetery. It is very important to have a copy of your honorable discharge. Also, we're arranged to have military honors for the veteran. If anybody has any questions, feel free to ask.
I have questions, sir.
Oh, okay, sure.
So John, obviously very important to prearrange your funeral because you want to honor the wishes of a loved one, or even the way you want it done for yourself. Prepayment, what is the advantages of prepaying a little or the entire sum?
Well, if you're going on Medicaid, all the elder care attorneys will recommend you prepay the whole funeral because it's exempt from the nursing home and the government. And they passed a law to cover that because they didn't want people going to Potter's Field to work 50 years as a bus driver or, electrician and couldn't afford an insurance because all the money, a funeral, because all the money went for the care. So they made a regulation. You can prepay your funeral and fund it and still be eligible for Medicaid. So if you decide to live at home and get round the clock health care, the money goes pretty fast. This way you can put aside the money for your funeral, and that's perfectly legal and keeps you on Medicaid. It's approved by Medicaid.
Thank you for sharing that, because that is a huge, huge benefit and reason why you want to set aside those funds now, because that's where they'll stay. Nobody can touch it. Nobody can take it.
Exactly.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then say you move to another state, you move to Florida, but you want to come back to New York to have your funeral. All you have to do is call us, and we would arrange for the transportation and the loved one to come back to New York. And they use the money in the pre-plan, what's available, to take care of most of the cost, if not in some cases all of the cost.
So let's look at that geographically now. You prepaid with a funeral home in New York. As you said, that can be transferred to another funeral in the state of New York. But let's say you've moved to Florida. Can you transfer that to Florida, or would you have to come back?
They can, if it's not Medicaid, we can have the money transferred to the Florida funeral home if they're not going to come back to New York. Now, if it's on Medicaid, the Florida funeral home can send the death certificate up to pre-plan, and they're in New York State, and they'll pay the Florida funeral as long as they have proof of the death and that the Florida funeral home took care of the funeral arrangements.
Got it. Okay. So there is flexibility here. It's not like you're completely locked in to
No.
one funeral home if you've made that choice. Um, any other insight that you can share about pre-planning?
Well, you can also transfer your pre-plan. Say you wanted to use Jones Funeral Home and they were family owned, and now the big corporation has taken over
Which,
and
by the way,
you,
let's share with everybody, is happening in large numbers in many areas around the country. However, Gleason is not, and that's family owned.
right, that's, yes, Gleason's is family owned.
Yeah.
And for a lot of families, when the big corporation took over funeral homes in Flushing and Queens Village, they transferred their pre-plans to us and we honored all their wishes. But pre-arrangement is always a good idea because the information that is needed is quite extensive, and to have to give it at the time of death, the date of birth, the mother's maiden name, the father's name, the social security number, it's a lot easier to already have the folder in the funeral home and just say, call the funeral home, say we made pre-arrangements, and you have a file, and
Sure.
it makes it a lot easier for us and also for the family. The comment we get the most is making the pre-arrangements has made a very difficult situation a little easier. And that's all you can ask for.
Absolutely. And it's a very emotional time when somebody passes. You have a lot going on. The last thing you want to worry about is all of these, making all of these plans. I mean, think about how much easier it is for people with that they just make one phone call and there it begins when the pre-arrangements are done.
Yes, that's correct. And
Mm.
also they can talk it over with the family about what grave they want to use or if they want to be cremated, what church service or rabbi they want. And when the guest of honor makes the decisions, the children usually go along with the decisions. Whereas if no decisions made, when the children come in, sometimes everybody has a different opinion, which is kind of natural. And this prevents any uh, mistakes a lot of time.
Sure. And going back to the actual plans themselves, that can change, can it not? Let's say somebody prearranges 5 years ago, and then they decide, you know what, I want to feature, I don't know, something nautical uh, in my final goodbye, whatever it might be. You can go back and make changes, correct?
You can make changes, especially if it's revocable and you're not on Medicaid. If you're on Medicaid, you can make changes, but whatever money is in the account has to be spent on the funeral. But you can change the casket, you can change from burial to cremation. It's flexible. It's just that if the money that's put aside with Medicaid has to be spent on the funeral and not, uh, not refunded to the
Sure.
family because it's
Sure.
Medicaid.
Yeah. Once it's set aside, somebody can't decide, oh, you know what? I'm going to do cremation instead of a traditional casket and burial. So now that I made that change, can I get a refund on that? That can't happen. That's what
No.
we, okay.
Now,
And
also,
understandably so.
Yeah, Medicaid recipients can also set aside funds in an irrevocable funeral trust for like their spouse and their children and their parents. So if their funds are there, they do allow you could have prepay your wife's funeral, your father, your parents' funeral. It has to be set up irrevocably, which means the money has to be spent on their funeral. But you can do that if the funds are available.
How about some other insight, things that we should know or remember when it comes to pre-planning?
Well, it's always good to check the grave out to make sure there's room. But I know many times we've called the cemetery while making pre-arrangements, and
Mm.
we're told this surprisingly the grave is filled up. So it gives the family a chance to go select another grave in advance and pay it off maybe over time if they have to in the same cemetery and near their loved one. Whereas having to be told when the death occurs that your grave is filled up, I mean, that really puts stress on the family, unexpected stress. And it's a lot better to find out in advance than not.
Sure.
And it's definitely a good thing to do. And the nursing homes, the elder care attorneys in the nursing homes, they'll tell you to do it too, because they have experience where somebody dies in a nursing home with no funds, and unfortunately, sometimes they're transferred to Potter's Field, and this can be avoided by prearranging.
So you've mentioned before, and I can't remember the term of this contract agreement that needs to be typically signed so that things can be taken care of. I forget what it is.
The agent form?
Thank you. Yeah, what is
Yes.
that?
The agent form is a simple form that you can name a person as your agent, and it's for your funeral arrangements only. They can put down what they like on the form. I wish to be buried or cremated, want my wake at Gleason's and my mass at church, or I want Rabbi Ackerman to do the service. And then it just has to be witnessed by two people. And then the agent signs to agree to accept the appointment. You can have a backup agent if you wish. And God forbid if anything happens to the agent, then the backup agent is in charge. And it's perfectly legal, and it's a great form. Sometimes a lot of the nuns and priests use that because, when they get up in age, they have no family members and no children. So they use the agent form to take care of their prearrangements.
The agents, the two agents on the form, is that sort of like an executor? They have just a responsibility just to sign?
Yeah, well, the agent, it's just for funeral arrangements only, whereas the
Sure.
executor has to be appointed by the court, and that could take 6 months to a year. So having the agent in charge, he supersedes uh, any other family members, and he can take care of the funeral arrangements and follow the guest of honor's decision. And it really helps at the time of death by lessening problems that could come up.
Can anybody be asked to be an agent?
Anybody could be an agent except the funeral director.
Okay.
They put that in so the funeral directors wouldn't take advantage of the situation and name themselves an agent. And this way, anybody can be an agent, and it's a good thing to do.
So let's say somebody has some challenges with their family and they want to prearrange because they don't want to have it dealt with by family fighting over we're going to do this, we're going to do that. He would like that. He would like no, he would like that. Could somebody just come into the Gleasons and just say, I'm not going to bring in family for this. Can you give me two agents? And it could be just two staff members at the funeral home.
Well, we could have two staff members at the funeral home witness the agent's signature, but we kind of prefer if, they get a neighbor,
Okay.
Priest or social worker if they're in a nursing home
Sure.
to do. I mean, we in the case where sometimes there's no relatives and there's nobody, so then we would have the secretary's witness, and they would name a neighbor or the social worker or
Right.
priest as the agent because there's nobody else, no relatives, period.
Right. I guess it's, makes sense to minimize any potential conflict of interest within the funeral
Yes,
home, picking somebody who's not affiliated.
right, exactly.
Wow. Is it that just that simple? That somebody reaches out, says, I want to pre-plan and just state some of their wishes, whether it's cremation, whether it's burial, whether there is a plot involved, maybe a family plot, and go from there.
Yes, it's very simple to do. And all they have to do is make an appointment. If they want to come to the funeral home in person, that's fine. We've gone to many houses, nursing homes, apartment houses. Everybody's different. And we would do the pre-arrangement there. And it's very simple to do, and they don't have to make an immediate decision. They can take all the paperwork and say, well, I want to think about it. I want to talk it over with a relative, and then we're fine with that. And they call us a week later or 2 weeks later, and they ask us to come back to finalize everything.
I'm surprised and gratified to learn that it could just start with a $500 payment and can go from there. I think many people believe that, oh, you'd have to prepay everything now, because it's pre-arranging, but not the case.
No, and also you can come in, just pick out what you want and not pay for anything. And we put it on file, and
Wow.
then they say, well, I'm going to leave it for my children to pay. And that, when the time comes, they tell the children, we have a file, we didn't make any payments, but all my wishes are on file at Gleason's, and it makes it a little easier. They have to pay. They know exactly.
I believe that would be a gift to your children to take the burden off of them, because at that moment of, somebody passes away, even if it's expected, it just, so many emotions involved, and you want to take that time to remember and celebrate somebody's life and not be deep into the logistics and all of that comes along with the funeral, because there's a lot going on there, and you're dealing with family coming from out of state, potentially, all of that going on. It's like a tornado that's not a storm you want to ride out, where all it takes, and like to your point, you could just make those plans even if you didn't want to set aside funds initially for it. John, can you tell us how somebody can learn more about Gleason, maybe reach out to you to talk about the process?
Sure. Yeah, they can call us at 718-359-6300, or they can look at our website, gleasonfh@aol.com, and or they can even send us a letter to 14920 Northern Boulevard, Flushing, New York, 11354, Gleason Funeral Home, and we'd be glad to answer any and all questions.
Well, I appreciate you answering a lot of questions today and kind of demystifying pre-arrangement. What a wonderful thing to make life easier and honor your wishes as well, or loved ones. Thanks for being here today.
You're welcome. Thank you, Steve. Appreciate it.
Thanks, John. We're coming right back.
Are you looking for even more of the podcasts and hosts that you love? The Podcast Business News Network is proud to announce that you now have even more ways to listen live. Check out the MyTuner Radio, online radio box, and Simple Radio apps on iOS and Android, or find us online. Search for Business News Network on mytuner-radio.com, or search Podcast Business News Network on streama.com and onlineradiobox.com/US. Take your podcast on the go and don't miss a minute of the action.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house.
And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned.
This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.